Thank you very much, Hugh, for the introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm glad to be back here again, and I've done a lot of work over the years. There are a lot of stories to tell. There's always far too much to cram into a single lecture. I'll do what I can in an hour, but I will be jumping around a little bit between subjects which all relate to one another. So I'm going to be chiefly speaking about stone circles. I am one of the few scientists in Britain who actually believes in the whole idea of the mother goddess in prehistory. Too many of the, or perhaps all of the university archaeologists ignore the treatment of religion when they're talking about the ancient monuments of the Neolithic and early Bronze Age. They have some sort of ostrich-like behavior there. They stick their heads in the sand and they dig their holes, they study monuments for the facts that they can see. They write pretty boring accounts, but accurate accounts of what they've found. But they refuse to go beyond that and try and decide what the builders, the planners, were thinking when they were making the monuments, planning them, and worshipping at them. So I'm going to stress that very much today, although I have an audience which I know loves the whole idea of the Earth Mother, Mother Goddess, Sky God, and all that. If instead you were in a wholly academic audience in a university, I would be having to try and convert you, but I don't need to convert you. You're okay on that. The other thing I'm going to introduce you to are many of my finds I have explored extensively across Britain and Ireland. But there's one part of the Avebury Hills which has given me very many useful finds which I shall be interpreting as we come to them. So today, the areas of Britain and Ireland which I shall be talking about are these, namely where we are in Wessex, and in Stonehenge I will mention a bit. Avebury I'm going to miss out today because it will take too long to add it in. Stanton Drew is in here, not so far from where we are now. I shall be dealing in southwest Ireland. Drombeg and Bowernoch are the ones I will treat for examples. There's also Knowth up here close to Newgrange, and I shall be in northeast Scotland as well. And I do want to tell you who I am. Of all people, I am a real true Wiltshireman. I've done all the genealogy back as far as I can to where the church records began, and all of my traceable ancestors are Wiltshiremen. Many of them come from Salisbury Plain, and the others come from the Marlborough Hills around Avebury. In other words, it's all farming stock. My ancestors were working on farms. And how about their ancestors? I mean, really going back to pre-Christian times, who knows? I would like to hope that they were all worshipping the mother goddess. So let's move on then. I've already commented on that, so let's go ahead. The important thing is, well, twofold. One is recognizing plans of Stonehenge for what they are and for what they mean. And this leads us into the into a discussion about the marriage of the gods. If there's a marriage of the gods, it's between a sky god and a deity on earth. And then the other is actually finding artifacts which have been shaped by hand by the people from the period I'm talking about, which is the entire Neolithic and the early Bronze Age. It seems odd that after a couple of centuries of people looking at stone circles, it was never really realized that the time of day to be there is sunrise. I shall be explaining a bit about how sunrise leads to particular watchable events which account for the planning. Now, I went through some of this a year ago in this very room, and I don't want to repeat much of that, but I have to repeat a little bit of it because part of the audience is different. What is quite essential and easy to explain once you've got into the subject is that most stone circles, and certainly all of the recumbent stone circles, conformed to a calendar, an 8-fold calendar of the year. And if I was talking to an academic audience, they would have no problem, I presume, with that, because the proof is there. The truth can be seen from the behavior of the shadows between stones. But with an academic audience, they would not like me to go that extra leap and explain why these stones are interacting. And that's what I should be talking about now. Simon Banton yesterday morning told you something about my view of Stonehenge as a Midsummer Sunrise monument above all else. It does a lot of other things. Stonehenge is a complex monument, but the initial planning depended on some feature of belief in the Mother Earth sky god religion. And when that's applied to Stonehenge, it's really easy to see. So a lot of this I have explained in a book which is completely sold out. It came out a year ago, and I am producing a new version which will be available in about 6 months' time. It will have a different title. The content will be, most of it changed, improved, added to, lengthened, in other words. I have another book out there as well, which I've called A New Bible in 3 Testaments, which tells the story of mankind through all of prehistory and into history. And one of the academic works which got through the system was treating what we know to be Mother Earth sites in a way that academic archaeologists would accept. So I'll be giving now proof of what this slide is showing. A question for discussion, which I'll hold with anybody who is here at any time during the rest of the day, is this matter here. I have a lot of artifacts from the Neolithic and early Bronze Age. About 200 of them are first class, and quite a few of them are actual images made of heads or body parts and so on. And, I'm already 83, and how many years am I going to live? I'm doing as much as I can now to keep going, keep researching. But one day, all my collection of artifacts must go somewhere. And I am afraid that the museums, the classical museums, which deserve to have them, well, it's difficult to get anything into them because they're all overloaded already. And yet the finds I made ought to be on display in the best museums. And they might be one day, but they've certainly got to be held somewhere. And all right, they're in my house at the moment, maybe another 10 years, and then they've got to go somewhere else. So I'm already hoping that we somehow, maybe a private museum can be fixed. You'll like them when you see them. And I've started making some replicas of some of them. Now let's get down to business. Avebury Avenue, probably everybody's been there many times, and that pair of stones, very well known. And everybody correctly says that we're looking at male and female symbolism when we look at that pair. It was in 1936 that Alexander Keeler and Stuart Piggott noticed this when they were excavating and digging up stones which were buried, and they made the first comment. We have a recognition of gender here. This is male-female symbolism. Not all the classical archaeologists are comfortable with that, but yeah, all right, quite a few are. But it's going beyond that where we find they can be difficult. Now, I'm going to show you that that pair that you see there, you find again and again and again at other sites. And we're going to start with Drombeg, which is in County Cork. Very nicely placed, near a pretty fishing port called Glandor, and you can see the sea there in the distance as well. When we home in on it, notice that there is a recumbent stone, flanked by two tall, slender stones, straight-sided. This is an obvious case of male-female symbolism. The recumbent stone is female, and I'll tell you why. And the sentinel stones adjacent are male. That's in the southwest side of the circle. And now we're looking on the eastern side, where all the stones on the eastern side are straight-sided, tall, taller than they are broad, and so on. But pay attention to this one, that one there. If you look on the other side of it, you find that there is this carving, which explains, it's shouting at the whole world. This is what the stone meant to the people who were planning the circle, the people who were worshipping there, and the people who, or perhaps the sculptor who actually did this, is a really fine display of a phallus, and it might be unique for the period in Britain and Ireland. Now let's go to the recumbent stone and look at it more carefully. You see it's flat-topped, very carefully smoothed to be flat-topped. And there is a mark on it, I'm referring to this one here, which the excavator 60 years ago tried to say, it doesn't look much like an axe. That's where it got left. And that's been copied on into other books on archaeology by archaeologists. It's not a very good axe. Well, there's a better photograph. Of course, over the last 4,000 years, the whole stone has been cracking a bit. It's not so good as it was. And there are two cut marks there. So what I've done is to do a tracing of what we're looking at. And I don't need to tell anybody here what that means. And I will remind you of the sort of female artistry that is found fairly widely all across Europe. These particular pictures are New Stone Age and prior to the Neolithic. But across Europe, there are plenty of Neolithic vulvas. So this is a summary then at this stage. Straight-sided stones, when they're deliberately chosen and positioned, imply male symbolism. And recumbent stones, of which there are about 100 between County Cork and Aberdeenshire, more than 100, then they are always in the western quarter, the really southwestern quarter. So let's look at some vulva carvings which are near us. I hope that everybody here has been to the Long Barrow at West Kennet, which is only a couple of miles from Avebury, and the centre stone there has a carving on it which is 2 meters long, 2 meters long, and it goes in about 3 inches. Some more pictures here. I was there about 20 years ago when Mike Pitts, the archaeologist who is editor of the magazine for British archaeology, and I was showing this to him, and he couldn't believe it. He couldn't see it. And here it is. I said, look, it starts up here, comes all the way down to there, 2 meters of it. And the whole lot is smooth. It's been rubbed at by probably people with axes or flints trying to put magic into their stone, into their arrowhead, into their axe, which had a job to do. And it goes in as deep as 3 inches in just the right place and so on. And he was saying, up here, well, maybe the rain came down like that or something. 5,500 years of rain. You know what I think about that. So this is really very nice. When you enter, by the way, West Kent Long Barrow, and you all walk under the lintel stone, you're walking under the head of a deer. It's a carving, and I don't know how many people have seen it. I first saw it about 15 years ago, and the book I wrote on Avebury I didn't put it into it because I hadn't seen it then. I found this 3 or 4 years after that book came out. But it's beautiful. It's a real good carving. And yet, it's difficult to get anyone who has degrees in archaeology to accept that. And inside, at the end, in the end chamber, there's a very good carving of a head in profile looking left. And the proportions are excellent. You know, there is no exaggeration here, trying to make out that the whole thing is accidental. This dates certainly from the founding of the barrow. It goes into the ground quite a few inches as well. It was surely put there and worked in position. And it gives us an early date, because we know what the date is. 3650 BC is what the date is for the founding of the barrow. And here we have, therefore, a carving dated to at least that. Now I'm going to show you some of my finds of artifacts which are small enough to actually carry. And the area in question is east of Avebury upon Overton Down. So looking at this, you have to imagine that Avebury is over here, and if you walk up the long street called Green Street from Avebury, you're coming along here onto Avebury Down, and beyond that is the top of Overton Down. And in this 1 square kilometre, I have found well over 100 artifacts, probably 150 actually come from there. A few more in my collection come from a bit further north, where there used to be a village, and a few odd ones from other places. But it's this area, absolutely rich in Neolithic, early Bronze Age artifacts. So I've spent, when I made the first discovery, it was in 1996. I then spent the next 6-8 years intensively investigating everything. Since then, I've only been back occasionally. But altogether, I've been up on those hills 300 odd times, inspecting them, working on them. Now, the various areas, it became easier to discuss them if I actually broke the whole area into smaller, manageable compartments for discussion purposes. So what I've done here is to call them North Temple, East Temple, West Temple, South Temple, and Moon Temple. So just a quick look at Moon Temple first. It's dominated by two megaliths. There they are, facing each other. And if you're there for the summer sunrise, you can have that vision. Now, I want to show you one of these stones. It's going to be this one, close up. Now, that photograph was taken such that both of those two stones are in the picture. We're looking along what was back here on the skyline becomes now, we're looking sideways, as it were, perpendicular to that direction. And while this picture is here, I want you to notice this. Down here, there is a cave, a little artificial cave. Now I'm going to show you the next picture. I found that outside of that big megalith, just there, like that. And next to it was a triangle with a hole piercing it. The hole you see here, in other words, the vulva of a pubic triangle, goes all the way through, artificially made. So we have the front and back visible here. Now, what we have, therefore, is this link. We have a head and we have a female triangle. So the implication is we're looking at a very primitive goddess head. Now, not so far away, I found this 25 kilogram, that's 50 odd pounds weight, this lovely triangle, and the cup mark in it is in the vulvar position. It's deeply carved. The whole thing is a deliberate carving, which is extraordinary, really, that I could find such a thing as this on the surface, because what is the position up there on those hills? If you've been there, you know you're walking on turf, which is on top of chalk, and the turf is very thin. Any object that is left on the turf can't go down more than 4 or 5 inches because it then meets solid chalk. What happens when you turn this over? This picture shows you as I found it, and I had to carry it back to my car, and it's quite a weight, that. Get it into the car, then I drove home to my house, get it out of the car, I then heaved it onto our settee, and it turned over to show me the backside. Quite extraordinary. The whole surface is deliberately carved like a seat, and not just a seat like you're sitting on, a seat with a ridge in the middle. It's absolutely obvious that this was made to be sat upon. And when it's in that position, of course, the vulva now is out of sight. It's on the other side of this. So, what was all that used for? It was certainly part of some ceremony to do with fertility, and the date has to be somewhere around the late Neolithic or possibly early Bronze Age. But I think late Neolithic, there are reasons for that. And why were they there outside of that huge megalith I showed you? The answer is those two stones were surely in that little cave for some 4,000, 5,000 years. And it was only maybe sometime in the last century or two that some curious person fiddling around thinking, what might be in the cave, they pull out various things, pull out two stones, which they don't understand, and then just leave them outside. I think that little cave in the megalith preserved these objects for all of that period. Now, moving on, here is another triangle stone that I found. This time, the cup mark representing the vulva is in the end. Here's another picture of it. Extraordinary, isn't it? And that's the third one from the hills. I've put them all here, all together. I put them onto grass in order to show their relative sizes and the fact that these are all from that little area up on the Avebury Hills. And you'll appreciate, I'm sure, that I couldn't leave any of them there for fear that they would go missing. So I've been bringing them all home with the intention of giving them to a museum. Now, not far away from that last triangle, I spot this. I pick it up and put it on the nearest megalith. Now, it doesn't look too marvelous for breasts, really, does it? That's because we're looking at the back of it. And the other way round, we have a pretty good-looking female breasts. So I've come back to the megalith that accounts for several of the objects I've already shown you, though not all of them. The others were from a bit farther away. And this time, I decided to put my hand in there and really pull out what I could find. And this is what came out. A worked stone, I mean, that's a worked stone. That is probably, although it looks a bit like a figure, it's probably just a natural piece of flint. Nonetheless, it must have impressed somebody to store it. And what do we have here? Well, it looks like a cranium. There we are. And if you look at it from the side, you see that. It's a piece of flint. And outside of the flint is more flint, but also some crystal work. And so it looks like a human brain. So what we have here is something that must have been treasured by that community who were living up there on the hill in that age of deep respect for belief in a fertility religion. And here we have something which would be enjoyed, I think, to be held by, say, a shaman, somebody who is a medicine man, let's say, somebody who can make out, that he has extra powers because he has these special objects. And other things this particular one is from inside. It's just another bit of stone, is it? When you turn it round and put it like that, it becomes a lozenge. And then when you look at it in the middle here, there's a groove, a vertical groove. So again, it's a feminine lozenge. It's telling us that sort of shape was symbolic of the female gender. And then I'm pulling out all of these little lozenges. And from outside, scattered around, are a lot more. I'm suggesting that all of this stuff was in that little cave for 4,000 or 5,000 years. And the big icons, you know, the head and the first pubic triangle, were used probably in ceremonies in some way for fertility purposes. And after use, on particular days of the year, they were put back into the cave again for storage. And then there came a sad day when nobody ever went back again. And they just stayed there, waiting for somebody to come along who would recognize what they mean. The shape of a lozenge in megalithic size is common all across that region. I could lead you and show you a dozen big megaliths just like this. They are natural lozenges used for particular purposes. But this one's got to be my favorite because imagine this. You know the word serendipity? Well, there we have an artificial groove telling the people who were there what the stone meant to them. And it's telling me and you that this is a female stone with an artificial groove. And it's been lying like that for hundreds of years. And yet serendipity has put this red algae into it and it's given it a blood color which is so beautiful. If you go to the Alexander Keeler Museum, you can actually see this piece of chalk, which they describe as a chalk slab, which was found on Windmill Hill, but at the bottom of one of the old ditches. Now, chalk has no lifetime at all if it's left on the surface. It degrades very quickly. But if it's down at the bottom of a ditch, which is then filled with chalk, of course, it can last. So the excavators in the 1930s found this and just said, oh, it's a chalk slab with a pit in the middle. And I look at it and I turn it round and I say, it's a chalk lozenge and it's a charm. It's very, very important. And we have a date for it as well. So I think back in those days, lots and lots of chalk lozenges would have been made. And if any survive at all, they're in chalk pits or ditches. Again now, on another day, I'm up there. Gosh, that was a nasty day, that was. I got there into the site of interest. It was just beginning to rain. Didn't like it at all. But I stayed just long enough, 5 minutes, and I found this. Now, that is a natural piece of sarsen, hard sarsen. But somebody started to try and make an ear out of it. And if you look at it here, there's a part of it that looks a bit like a nose. So, but the reason I found it is that the whole thing was upside down. Now, the base here is perfectly flat, artificially flat. Somebody spent weeks making that really flat so that it could stand on a flat surface looking good, as you've just seen. Now, putting the three items together, which I found quite close to one another, we have this lovely trio of sarsen objects. All of them shouting out femininity, all of them calling out these objects were part of the worship of Mother Goddess or Earth Mother, we don't know what really to say, in the time of a fertility religion. Now, I can show you a lot more, but I have to be conscious of how the time is going. So I'll only leave you to read that. But that led me to another site. And here is one thing I found from Wading Hill. Here is another head. And I found this head at the bottom of the post that I put it on. And it was a new post. Somebody was putting in a new fence. Somebody at that point couldn't get the post to go down. They hauled out two old stones and set them aside and left them. And that was next to it. So yet again, we have these examples of stone pairs, a head and a pubic triangle, repeated again. And I have several of these. I also have lots of things of this type, where what was found in these ancient times was a flint which had a natural hollow in the middle, but they were thinking cup mark. Cup mark means something to do with a female divinity. They improved its shape, making it a five-sided figure, so it would stand up nicely. So there. I have lots of these heads. And of the feminine type triangles, I have about 20. I've tried to make it quite clear that we are dealing with belief at a time of male-female symbolism being normal for the people there. The community had a fertility religion. So what do we do with these artifacts? You can find me anytime during the day, but it would be nice to have a group of people who could together do something along these lines. Because if a traditional museum, as it devises, or at Avebury, the Keeler Museum, won't take them, then they need to be on display somewhere so that the whole world can enjoy them. And as I repeat, 1 square kilometre, almost all the finds I've shown you were in that region. And there are other things up there too. I mean, that's a very good carved head on a huge megalith. No, that's a 2-ton megalith. And how about this 2 or 3 ton pyramidal stone? Can you deny that is not that was not respectful of female symbolism? It's standing there now. It's been there for the last 5,000 years or 5,500 years. All traditional archaeologists have walked past it, and all the others. Excavations have been done up there, not in the Neolithic, but Saxon Age, medieval excavations. Now, I'm going to say now something about the union of male and female. But notice that we are dealing, without any argument, with a calendar. A calendar that goes right through the whole year. And this particular one I've chosen to illustrate today because when you look at it, you see a ring of stones. They are not separated evenly, and the recumbent stone, the female stone, is out here on the left, and the shadows are falling from all of these male stones at different dates of the year. And the dates are the easy dates, midsummer, Beltane, equinox, roughly, and Imbolc, and midwinter. That's a calendar. 5 stones with the recumbent create an 8-date calendar. Now, Drombeg. Notice, while we're here, you have that lozenge stone, and next to it, a pillar stone, a male stone. I'm emphasizing now the recumbent stone because that's the direction of midsummer sunrise. The sun comes over here. But the people who arranged the stones here wanted the direction or the principal axis to go on to the horizon, where there is on the horizon a V-notch. And into that V-notch, the sun sets at the December solstice. And that must have been important to them because they aligned things this way. So this stone, instead of being set centrally there, they displaced it to work exactly for that purpose. And this means then that we can get the 6 months of the summer being worked in this fashion. So you can see here, midsummer sunrise, Beltane, and the equinox. But you cannot get any winter sunrises landing on the recumbent stone, because in winter it's down here that the sun is rising. So what they did was put in a second female stone, and it's this one up here, which is the lozenge stone. And next to the lozenge stone is this little, well, it's small in being the smallest stone on the site, but it's a straight-sided male pillar. The two are side by side, and this way we get everything working for the winter half of the year. So now you're being shown a close-up of the lozenge, and you see it again here. I might say that I felt it necessary to survey the entire circle properly because the excavator had not got it exactly right. And if we now, what I was showing you was up here, the equinox there. But there's also an equinox event happening down here. So we're now back to the lozenge again. There's the lozenge again and the pillar stone here, looking at it again. Now what happens at the equinox? The sun rises over here, comes through a gap between two stones. The sunlight falls on that, and in the middle of the lozenge, which is now angled, you get the shadow, the male shadow. And so I've got lots of these pictures. That's just to emphasize what's going on here. This gap was arranged so that the sun will shine through, hit that, and go on there. So all the the winter dates work in this fashion. The lozenge, yes, receives a shadow slightly differently depending on which calendar date we are on. So always, in the east, everything is straight-sided. Notice these two stones here. They're pretty close together, but they look pretty ordinary. But here, if you walk round to the recumbent stone and then look, they are now close together. And what happens? Well, the sun rises in that gap because that's the equinox for the start of the other half of the year. And well, this is just to show you what you can actually see. This is the top of the where those two stones form the notch. The light that comes over the top is in here. You can see it just in there. And guess what's here? It's the carving of the vulva. So yeah, that's the same. So very, very briefly then, we have established a 12-month calendar. It's planned into the stones, and it's been read back only because we've been looking at everything at sunrise. And I've been there and at two other stone circles dozens of times now. So we can't argue with that. Even the academic archaeologists cannot argue with that. The proof is in the photographs. And I've carried this over into Scotland, and I was there for the winter solstice, and well, I had to bear with snow. It was really pretty difficult, but we got what we wanted. And guess what? Also at the same stone circle, there's another female stone, just like what we saw in Drombeg, and what we know about Avebury. And at a different stone circle, Lone Head of Daviot, we have, again, recumbent stone, and each side of it, a male stone. The male stone itself stops here. What the people did was to find a stone that looked like the glands of a penis, and they put it on top. So that's why it looks as what you see. Over here, that is the other companion stone, the other male stone, but the top is missing. In fact, back in the 1930s, an archaeologist did some excavation here, and this was lying on the ground. The top here was already missing, and so he put back together, but we can guess what was on top of this, something similar to that. One of the stones that does the shadow casting at Lone Head of Daviot is this one, and I only put it in because on this day when I went there, the cup marks, which are drilled into it, showed up very beautifully because of the snow. But this is the sort of thing we get. Unfortunately, all these trees are here. They should be removed, but the sun is there, coming up just right to link that stone I just showed you, the one with the cup marks, to this. If those trees weren't there and we could get a strong shadow, we would have a union between those two stones. Now briefly to Knowth. That's just a part of the great mound of Knowth. Here is a plan. Out on the west side, there's two stones standing outside. On the east side, there's a single stone. So that's the western side, a male stone and a female stone. And by the way, here is George Ogan, who spent 40 years of his life working here. He is the man responsible for restoring Knowth. And I wanted him to know what my thinking was. So I sent, well, actually, the way it worked out is that a friend of mine, who was a professor in Ireland, bought 2 copies of my book, sent one to George Ogan, and George Ogan liked it and bought it with him. And one reason why he liked it is because of what I was saying about male stones casting shadows onto female stones. And this is what we saw at sunrise on the September the 21st last year. So notice, this is one of these carved megaliths, a curbstone. Here we have lots of vertical lines. The central vertical line is here, and the shadow of that is meeting it. Again, though, the shadow's a bit weak because of all these trees. Nonetheless, the sunlight coming through there was just enough. So there's George Ogan again, and he really liked the story. Because I told him all this. He got me into Knowth and Newgrange for sunrise on those dates around the equinox. And it was because of him that I got in. And so he invited me into the cabin where he actually did all the work, you know, the research cabin, and gave me and my friend lunch. Now, we're getting on. I must keep going. Stonehenge, then. Simon Manton showed you a bit of this yesterday, that the hailstone of the job of the hailstone seems to be to cast a shadow into the middle of the monument to reach the altar stone, and you have this union. The hailstone you have to regard as the representative on earth of the sky god in his epiphany as the sun. And here we have a female monument. Stonehenge is a complete female monument, full of life, a fertility monument. And Mike Parker Pearson calls it the monument of the dead. So I've got quite a few pictures, and the shadow of the hailstone retracts eventually, but that's what you get if you're there. That's a reconstruction. So the short of it is then that Stonehenge was built to be a mating spectacle that hundreds of people could watch from the outside. And I've proved that also for Avebury, but not talking about it today. And if we reduce everything to just one sentence, what we are observing is the marriage of the gods, the Heros Gamos, the sacred marriage. And this is really the end of the talk, but I'm going to show you 5 more slides very quickly because of the stone circles that we're going to on Tuesday. In North Somerset, there's more than just Stanton Drew. Stanton Drew is down here, and the other stone circles that must have mattered to these people, because they all interlink with one another, are these. And I shall be showing you the work that I've done along with the owner of the site at Lee Down. Lee Down was seen in a damaged state around about 1890, only described very briefly as 3 or 4 stones in a ring, as part of a ring. And then it got lost, and no one else from English heritage ever found it again. So the landowner, once there was a change of hands about 1989, and the new landowner was gradually clearing away all the scrub, the brambles, the gorse, and then he touched on some stones, and then he thought of what someone else had told him. There used to be a stone circle here. And so I got involved, and we've been rebuilding. We have rebuilt almost the whole of the stone circle, and the discovery of an avenue was a surprise. I've done lots of excavations there. If we're down at Stanton Drew, looking west, you see where the sun is setting. That sun is actually setting into Lee Down. And one of the stone circles at Stanton Drew, I was responsible for these bones coming out from the base of the stone. But I didn't do any digging. A badger had got in there. A badger had done digging. There was all this dirt which had been pulled out by the badger. And with Pete Glastonbury, we were sifting through it all, and we found these bones, which turned out to be pig and cattle. And then finally, there's the stone circle, which was at Chewstoke, lost completely, found again by Paul Dorr by dowsing, and I want to take you there because somebody eventually needs to excavate there. And I've done my bit at Lee Down. It would be nice if another group, another team, was to work at Chewstoke. The landowner is compliant with all that. So that's the end of my talk. Thank you.